Thanks for checking out our game. We're a small team of industry veterans who've all taken a big pay cut to work on our own game because we felt we had something innovative with a theme we personally cared about.
I was the first employee. I started a little over 9 years ago at Guillaume, the studio head's house.
I've been making games for almost 30 years professionally, but I'd known Guillaume. We met in Toronto working at another company, and he asked me to come be the design director for We Happy Few.
I'd like to welcome Guillaume Provost from Compulsion Games.
Compulsion Games.
Hi, we're Compulsion Games, and we'll see you at PAX.
Compulsion was founded in 2009 by Guillaume Provost, who's our studio head and founder. He began a studio with this idea of building a place where we could make creative, interesting games.
Every game teaches you how to make that game. So by the time you're done, you know how you should have done it.
When we started We Happy Few, I don't think any of us really anticipated that 5 years later Microsoft would call us and say, hey, do you want to be a first-party Xbox studio?
How much were we spending? Little by little, we added more people, and it was like a train that we couldn't stop.
It's funny because sometimes people ask me, they'll put courage on me for starting a studio, and I laugh at them and I said, well, I kind of started it by accident.
Tell me about you and your company and who the hell you guys are.
I'm the studio head and founder of the studio. Originally, I didn't actually set out to start a studio. We're an experienced team. We followed our passion. Got approached by this Taiwanese conglomerate in Taipei who wanted to start a studio in Montreal. Everything looked like it was a really good deal, it was a really good salary, it was a really good concept. I got to start my own team, I had tons of money. So I signed the contract, told everybody we were leaving, we quit our jobs, and then financial crisis happened.
But now it's official, we are in a recession. The
money evaporated just a few weeks before moving. We'd set the ship to sail already to move to Montreal and start a studio, so we just moved to Montreal and started a studio just with no money.
When I was looking for work, I was applying everywhere, and I applied to his studio, which on the website was a studio. And then I looked it up, and it was a house. So of course I looked up this fellow to make sure he was credible, and it wasn't totally weird going to his house. And then I saw on his LinkedIn that he had like 1 million positive comments, and he had all of this many years of experience. He definitely had the chops. So I lucked out in this whole serendipitous thing.
Compulsion was really a name that we picked as a desire for us to make games, and something that we thought was a value that we wanted to explore, is a compulsion of players to play the games that we make.
I wanted to do art for games, but I wanted to work on more experimental stuff. So when I met Guillaume, it worked out perfectly because he was just starting his little indie studio and had this very creative project he was working on.
Compulsion had been developing a game called Contrast for a few years.
He basically founded the studio through that. In the very beginning, it was a lot of hard work.
There was a main character, there was the main character's invisible friend, there were mechanics, there was no story. The main character didn't have a name, and so I came on and we started batting around ideas. We eventually arrived at a theme of fatherhood.
I haven't thought about you in 1 million years.
Well, then I guess I gotta remind you who I am.
I'm just a wife and a mother now.
Yeah? I heard you had a kid.
We've been working really hard, and we're really excited about where we are.
He had done a prototype and needed someone on the art side to bring an art direction to the shadow mechanic for Contrast. And then we moved out of his house to a little office just down the hallway, and A few other people joined the studio, so we were about 5 for a little while. And then we grew to about 10 when we released Contrast in 2013. And I had a lot of responsibility early on to develop the style for that.
How do you feel you're pushing things forward with your game?
We try to tell human stories, I think, is the big part of it. It's not a story about getting the big sword and taking out the big, majestic bad guy. That's not us. You need to use your shadow shifting powers to solve puzzles.
Contrast shadow play is enchanting, but the spell is broken midway through its roughly 5 hours when the puzzles start relying on cliche ideas like moving boxes onto buttons to hold doors open.
The reward is always another glowing orb or another box to help solve another puzzle. But the biggest puzzle is Contrast itself.
We had just finished our first game, Contrast, which is a narrative-driven puzzle platformer, and I really didn't want to make puzzles anymore. I mean, it's an interesting genre, but it was a genre that was very taxing on a design standpoint and a creative standpoint, and we wanted to do something that scaled a little bit more. We wanted something that was replayable, we wanted something that was roguelike, we wanted something that was easier for a small team to create something memorable that would have value for players.
And now, the catchy new song from our favorite new band.
Have you had your joy, Ollie?
People tend to forget about it, but we were actually a really small team. When we started We Happy Few, there was just 5 of us. We were making a game in the context of a team that was, less than 10 people. We were making a much smaller game at the time. I wanted to talk about dystopia, or wanted to treat a dystopian universe because we lived in happy times. You always want to kind of have an escape reality at the time.
We Happy Few started as a project about drugs, dystopia, denial in a procedurally generated urban setting. It was this idea of saying, hey, we want to build a survival game, we want to build something that is challenging and hardcore, and then on top of that we thought, well, what kind of survival game would be interesting? We thought, maybe we'll set this in a city, which is not where a lot of survival games are set.
Guillaume wanted to do a game with happy drugs and happy masks. After some back and forth, our art director wanted to do something in groovy 1964 Britain.
Oh, hello.
One of Guillaume's ideas, which was really fascinating, was the idea of a survival game, but it was a social survival game. So instead of collecting wood to make a fire, you have to survive in a society. And for me, this is one of the kind of ideas that led to being 1960s dystopian England, because it reminded me of a bunch of cultural references that felt a little like that.
We wanted to avoid really cliche themes like 1984 and gray concrete blocks, and moved into discussing a bunch of different things that we thought were inspiring, like Brazil, Clockwork Orange. We looked at a number of Aldous Huxley's Brave New World was also a big inspiration in terms of having happy drugs and this kind of feeling of a society that would be happy while being in a weird kind of controlled dystopia.
Like Hot Fuzz was an example. This idea that you have this sort of perfect town and then you have this dark underbelly, and there's a sense of paranoia, and there's this sort of pressure from everybody to be perfect.
Try this easy test. Are you having a conversation that's bringing you down? Then one of the people who's talking to you is a downer.
Our art director, Whitney, really ran with that at the time and felt like the 1960s in England was a good setting and timetable to kind of cover that type of feeling, because it was a historical moment in time where the English stopped looking back towards the Second World War and were more forward-looking towards, the race to space and the future rather than looking back. And it's a time where there was a lot more form, more function, so there's a lot of creative elements that we could piece out together that kind of fit well into the mold of what we wanted to build.
The 60s was like I just felt it was a really strong period for a dystopia. You have this great Doctor Who sci-fi influence from English 60s television that I thought was really fresh. And to my knowledge, it hadn't been pushed in games to the degree that I thought it could be. A lot of people have been exposed to some cultural element to some degree, whether it's kind of the the quaint English setting or the kind of mod 1960s or the kind of retro sci-fi element. I just felt like there was a ton of crazy, cool material to work with.
Why do we bury downers 20 feet underground? Answer, because deep down, they're really nice people. Deep down, yeah. I think that's the best one of all. It really is.
This is a mood board showing a take on archetypal England with an emphasis on this sort of medieval influence, specifically in the palettes here and the signage and the clocks. I think time is going to be a super important element. This is sort of pushing this sort of gritty industrial English tone. And then this one here is kind of the quaint, super gardeny, a little more lighthearted.
No, for sure. And I think in the main game, we don't have a lot of very English, wild, on-purpose gardens that I think will be nice.
Yeah.
And I think Emmanuel's been exploring a bit of that and just having like really juiced up, wild-feeling gardens, which feels way more English and less like French.
When I joined the team, We Happy Few was still a sort of survival horror hybrid. These were extremely popular in the indie world at the time because you could make them economically without a large number of staff.
Now, interestingly, because it was a game that was made by such a small team, we moved away from telling a lot of story at the beginning, and we wanted to have like this replayable, systemic, roguelike experience that small team could do convincingly and kind of create an experience for players to enjoy. And that was really the genesis of what the type of game that we were making.
But very quickly, we discovered, hey, probably not scalable. This is not what the market wants. More and more games are including the better aspects or the more appealing aspects of survival games. Our competitors were doing it and they were all AAA. So to compete, we recognized that we had to craft a really memorable, unique world full of memorable, unique characters. So we started emphasizing story. And this completely changed the game design.
The first time we showed our game to the public was at PAX 2015. And we had a very small booth.
Here at PAX East, taking a look at
A game that was recently just announced.
We Happy Few.
We Happy Few.
So we're here to talk about We Happy Few. How's it going, Guillaume?
Really well.
And what we showed was a procedurally generated world, which didn't really have any story to it.
And everyone was like, oh, Bioshock, we want to know the world, what's the story, this is amazing.
Next, we have the game that I'm quite possibly the most excited about.
One of the most exciting games.
We were told by a lot of you guys on Twitter and Facebook to check out this game.
At the time, it was a prototype more than anything. And I think people really liked it. And this helped us transition into our Kickstarter.
All right, so basically look for it soon.
That's right. We are looking to make a Kickstarter campaign in 8 to 10 weeks with the express purpose to gather like an initial set of people and a community around the game to help us, really narrow down the mechanics while we work on the story in the background.
Awesome. All right, thank you very much, Guillaume.
Thank you.
At the time, what we were trying to do was build an experiment with this idea of open development, seeking feedback as we go. In order to do that, we thought, hey, Kickstarter might be a really great opportunity to reach people who really, really care about the project.
Any Kickstarter is a huge gamble. You spend months preparing for it, and you have absolutely no idea if it's going to work.
I'm actually sitting next to you already. The camera would probably just be framing you at that point, and then at one point, we switched to a camera framing both of us. I'm going to write myself just some quick cue cards, because otherwise this is going to be a complete disaster.
Now, our next guest is Guillaume Provost, head of Compulsion Games. And we like to play games, don't we? So please give a great Wellington Wells welcome to Mr. Guillaume Provost.
Bravo! Thanks for having me on the show, Jack.
Tell me, Guillaume, why make a game all about us?
Well, we like England.
Yes?
We like the 60s.
Yes, it is. We'd like to a universe that is a little bit darker this time around. And, Wellington Wells has been this alternate history where England was actually invaded by the Germans during the war.
Ah, yes, but we don't like to talk about so much, do we?
Can I finish writing my cue cards? Because right now I just want to write my cue cards. I just want to write my cue cards. At least I get my talking points in order.
So we were doing the Kickstarter campaign. Things were going really, really well. And then came E3, which was like this weird, it sucks all the vacuum of attention.
Microsoft kicked off E3 2015 with an exclusive look at Halo 5
Star Wars
Guardians.
Battlefront 4 is coming out November 10th.
So our Kickstarter flatlined. We definitely had a little bit of moment where we were a little bit more worried. And really, the people who were backing the campaign really rallied to get more attention.
Welcome back to We Happy Few. Oh God, what are you doing up here?
And we shot past our targets at the end. And really, it was kind of an incredible, interesting experience for us to just like understand that, yeah, actually, there was people out there that believed in what we could do and accomplish, and were interested in the type of game that we wanted to say.
People were reacting, and they were, to things we would show, and it confirmed what we knew internally, right? Story's great, exotic, eccentric characters great, strange devices that you learn to craft and use as weapons, also great. People love this stuff, so having a Kickstarter campaign was phenomenal in that way, and certainly the fact that it funded development for as long as it did, thank God. Otherwise there would be no We Happy Few, or we would have stopped when it was just a survival horror simulation.
Anything else you'd like to tell our audience?
Yes, actually. We worked really hard on this game, and we're always on the lookout for more feedback. So if you like the project, or you want to see more of Uncle Jack, come join us. Help us make this game.
And I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. Thank you so much for joining us, Mr. Jeffrey Porpoise, the creative director of We Happy Few. This is Jack Worthing wishing you another fabulous day in Wellington Wells. First time in the telly? Yeah.
Yes.
You were a bit stiff at first, but I think you warmed up and I think you did really well.
Thank you, Jack.
Okay.
Good job.
Thank you.
From Kickstarter, we engaged that community for a while, and that gave us like an opportunity to really actually work with the community. We started doing community updates every week. The team actually made over 160 updates to the community over the course of the lifetime of the project to keep people involved and also to get feedback from them over the course of the development cycle. But we actually helped gather more momentum to actually get the attention of a big player in the industry, which was Microsoft. That's really one of the first key turning points for both the project and the company, which is Microsoft actually signed us on a first idea at Xbox deal, which was a deal that helped us, get some attention.
We were approached by Microsoft and said, hey, do you guys want to be on stage for E3 2016? So we figured, okay, yes, of course. That kind of exposure doesn't just come. It's just a fantastic opportunity.
The community told us they wanted something. We had no money or attention or team to build those things. It's really a case of like figuring out how to make the egg and the chicken at the same time. It's been really the entire story of that project. We kind of played jujitsu for a while and got some money, created 5 minutes of what we thought that experience could be, and then went out big on the stage at E3 and showed it to millions of players online.
Now, I'd like to welcome Guillaume Prevost from Compulsion Games to come up on stage and show off a project that's going to be launching into Xbox Game Preview next month. Guillaume?
And in those 5 minutes, we had actually gone out and realized the type of story-driven experience that the players that we'd seen at PAX had told us that they wanted to experience in our world. It was really the moment where we catapulted from being a small indie game to like a world stage first moment. That actually launched our early access campaign, which then funneled more money for us to actually grow the team and actually realize the vision that we had for the team after having it shown to the public for the first time. And after 2 years of telling people this is the thing that we want to build, we finally had the team and the money to actually go and build it. One of the big kind of components that we were stressed out about is actually generating too much buzz for what we actually could deliver. dealing with a certain amount of buzz is great, but also make sure that you can actually deliver to the expectations that players have, and managing people's expectations, that's a really, really intricate balance that's really actually hard to build, because you want attention. If you don't have attention, nobody's going to play your game, but you also want to make sure that you're not sending the wrong messages or the wrong signals about what's the scope of the game that you're making, or what's the quality of the game that you're making, and make sure that the audience doesn't become disappointed when they actually start playing it. Yeah, so I figured like the reception at E3 was pretty good on the story bits. I think the one concern is just to make sure that we manage the buzz so that we also clarify that we are not like a 200-man team working on a $100 million budget, but keeping that excitement throughout the early access phase.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I guess it just remains to be seen. Will it work? So, when we released We Happy Few on early access, and we went on E3 and Microsoft showcased the game, and so this great, what we call the rat pinata moment.
Hit it!
Gearbox noticed and saw that and contacted us and said, hey, would you be interested in a publishing relationship? And at the time we had thought, well, you know, we're still quite small, we're self-published, do we want to go down that route? And Gearbox came to us and said, listen, we think you've really got something here. Can we work with you to promote it, to help it grow, and to build the game that you want to build? What people want is quite different to what we were thinking. And so in order to try and respond to that feedback, we needed to grow the size of the game ultimately and make a bigger project. And when you're making a bigger project, it's very scary when you're doing that alone. What Gearbox provided us was a perspective and education and knowledge that we just simply didn't have inside the studio. So basically, as you get bigger, you want to have great partners to work with to help you build your game.
You know, we attracted a lot of attention, and then with it, player expectations. We decided to make a bigger game, much bigger than what we originally had. And so the Gearbox partnership was a little bit difficult because we received a lot of backlash for it. With the announcement of that partnership, we also announced that, you know, we were not making a $30 game anymore, we're making a $60 game. And there would be a season pass, which, you know, is in something that is loved by all the gamers. So I think that the public, or mostly our fans, were taken back and very surprised by this. So yeah, it wasn't easy, for sure, internally. But it made so much sense for us to do this, you know. There's a lot of things that the public doesn't know. You know, we needed to do this in order to grow our team, in order to build a game that people wanted to play, in order to make a game for the studio to grow. It was the logical step to do, for sure.
When you send a game out into the world, you are never sure what the reception is going to be. I've certainly shipped games and people went nuts. You know, I was like, great, you know, I did the best I could and you loved it. And for me, that's what I did with We Happy Few. I did absolutely the very best I could for that game from start to finish. And if people loved it, they were gonna love it. If they didn't, they weren't.
One of the things that you learn as a writer is that all feedback is true and almost all solutions offered are wrong.
When we released We Happy Few, it was after 4.5 years of development, and the release was mixed. It was a mixed release. We have a large number of people who were super excited, loved what we had built, but then we had also a lot of people who were saying, hey, I'm having issues with the game and I am unable to do what I want to do in the game. I can't enjoy myself. And that's obviously super disappointing for us as developers.
Feedback that we got in the end from the game, I thought was pretty fair. Sometimes it's difficult to hear because you know it's feedback that you couldn't do anything about.
We were pretty aware of a lot of its flaws.
The toughest feedback was, ironically, the same feedback that we had reached internally, you know, the same conclusions.
There were bugs that we just were so difficult to fix that we knew about them and we just knew that we're going to have to suffer with them, and And then you feel bad because you know that people are going to see them, and it breaks the immersion, it breaks the experience.
People rightly point out that combat isn't as deep as it could be, and the AI are either overly predictable or entirely unpredictable, and that's fair.
I think with the procedural generation meant that we couldn't predict even what we would find for bugs in a lot of ways. So there were always surprises. It was like whack-a-mole, kind of.
When you're making a game, one of the most important things that you can get access to is feedback. Now, whether that feedback comes from a small group of players testing in your building, whether it's your team's feedback, whether it's your mum's feedback, or whether it's the general public's feedback, all of those things can really help you build a better game if you're listening.
You have to interpret the feedback and figure out what is the truth there that I can apply to what I'm doing. So you always have to interpret feedback. As a writer, I'll often find we put some lore in the game and people say, I really want to know more about this. And you have to know that the correct answer to that is great. If they want to know, that's great. That doesn't mean they get to know. If you told them, they might like it less. Wanting to know is a value in itself.
Not to worry, we'll get you back on your joy, and you can forget that anyone was ever screaming. You'll never be a downer again.
The toughest feedback that we received on We Happy Few was probably that we had really wildly different types of people interested in the game. And it's very hard to develop and respond to feedback if it's not unanimous.
You can't please everyone. Like, we've sold hundreds of thousands of copies of the game, which means hundreds of thousands of different people with different tastes. You definitely always have some certain individuals who say, hey, I thought we were making a really hardcore, procedurally generated, systemic survival game, and then you'd have these people who are interested in the story. They're like, hey, I want to experience the story. Why are these stupid, survival mechanics in the way? And that real kind of Frankenstein of trying to please too many people at once was definitely one of the things that I felt was difficult. And that's due to the changing nature of the direction that the project took.
Since the Kickstarter, we opened the game to the community. They could play the pre-alpha, they could play, early access. Early access opened it up to everybody, not only our backers. And what we want is really to inform gamers about how we make games, why it's complicated, and why certain decisions have to be made.
Knowing that there's a direction change that you would want to do for the game that would have made the game better, but not being able to do that because that's not the game you promised your Kickstarter backers or that you promised your early access backers. And we had a lot of people who say, hey, I don't understand why the world's procedural, for example. It didn't make as much sense in the context of having a story-focused game experience to have a procedurally generated game, but it made a lot of sense in the context of our Kickstarter campaign. Wanting on the one side to be faithful to what we've promised the community we would build, but also seeing what would be the right direction for the team is one of the things that was super difficult for us to deal with in a kind of an early access, community-driven game development where we had made Kickstarter promises at the beginning. That tension was impossible to reconcile.
Thought I knew the difference between heaven and hell, between the dark and the light.
I was thrilled with the game's reception. I was particularly thrilled that British people liked it. We were concerned that they might go, that's, you made that all up, you don't know anything of us. But they kind of went, oh yeah, that's pretty accurate. Yeah.
The people who remain with us, who are playing the DLCs, are very, very nice, loyal fans who they love the lore of We Happy Few. They love the world we created, and all of our characters, they mean something to them. And I think just talking with them about it is probably one of the calmer, nicer part of this whole journey.
I think people really dug the story and the world, and felt that we took them to a place that they hadn't been before, and gave them an emotional experience. I think we're going to do even better the next time.
Hello. Let's have a look at you, shall we? What happened to your clothes? Have you been running through rose bushes?
From the outside perspective, when they look at Compulsion Games and We Happy Few and everything that happened, from somebody who hasn't followed our updates, they will see a small indie company who sold out, got published by Gearbox, putting out a game that had flaws in it, but from the internal, we can write a chapter about everything we did that informs the public why we did it, And none of it has to do with selling out or being greedy or anything. It has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with just our livelihood and the craftsmanship of the game and what the public expects of you.
Every game teaches you how to make that game. So by the time you're done with the game, you know how you should have done it.
With a project like We Happy Few, which to this point has now taken 5.5 years, we've learned an extraordinary amount. I think probably the most important lesson that we learned is to make sure that the game we're making is in line with the expectations of the people we're making it for.
I think we learned through We Happy Few what we're good at, what we enjoy doing, and it helped us kind of solidify our identity from a creative standpoint.
We learned a ton about how to grow and build our team, how to work together better, what kind of games we personally were interested in, what kind of games should the studio make.
We also learned in We Happy Few that we needed more support in gameplay because we were kind of lacking in that department, and that was something that ended up coming out in the reviews.
Looking back and having like 20/20 hindsight is always pretty easy. The thing is, I don't know that I would have done a lot of things differently. We did the decisions that we could at the time with the information that we had. So we were lucky along the way to have a good time and be there at the right time, the right place for us to grow bigger with the game that we had.
The final DLC story is where you get to finally win. Victoria, or the Slave of Duty. I would start with just like the basic, she wants to impress daddy with her attention to duty.
Have you forgotten your joy?
Yeah, so she's all about the duty, idealizes.
About the duty.
Yeah, and then it switches to the point where she realizes that Bing is really a coward. So she goes off the joy.
Okay, so she goes off the joy and she discovers that Wellington Will sucks. Everything has not been about duty. So that's where she goes, fuck it, I have to burn the whole thing down.
Yeah, and that's when she goes and burns the whole thing down. And then we have all the fun gameplay that they're going to design, and you're going to blow stuff up. And
Dinosaur battle.
Dinosaur battle. I think
want
we got
a dinosaur battle.
Okay.
Can we have a dinosaur battle? Okay.
High five. Okay. I think our work here is done.
The Victoria DLC is the conclusion of the We Happy Few saga, and it has been quite a saga.
By the end of making We Happy Few, we kind of saw the engine that we'd created, what kind of stories that could tell really well. When we got to the final DLC, it's kind of the culmination of everything that we were trying to do in the first place. It's I feel, the game that we were trying to make.
Truth is the enemy of happiness.
It's very much like the base game in We Happy Few in the sense that it's a story about someone who goes off their joy and doesn't know what to do.
It stars Victoria Bing, the girl that everybody knows even if you haven't played the game. She's the girl, with the piñata who tells you to get back on your joy and who eats the rat. And in this one, she's the main girl and she's the one who is off her joy now.
Instead of focusing on survival-like elements, we're trying to tell a very linear, handcrafted story.
We are exploring the story of a woman who's sort of the nemesis of the first character. She's somebody who has stood for authority, and now she's on the other side exploring the world that she created.
Have you forgotten your joy?
You give me my joy!
I think the player probably has wanted to tear down this ridiculous system of We Happy Few, and We All Fall Down has the opportunity to stab the system in the guts and watch it bleed.
It's you know, it's the grand finale, it's the end of it. It's the end of We Happy Few.
We embarked on a quest to find creative teams that have the mastery of our art form. And we found innovative game designers, master storytellers, exceptional world builders. And now, I'm excited to welcome Compulsion Games to Microsoft Studios.
So when we started We Happy Few, I don't think any of us really anticipated that 5 years later Microsoft would call us and say, hey, do you want to be a first-party Xbox studio? I don't think that ever crossed our mind.
They basically came to us and said, we want you to keep doing what you do really well, but now you have a budget. So we were like, okay, that's great, let's do that.
We have been told to keep making really weird, just different things. So on the creative standpoint, it's just been all positive.
Trying to maintain creativity inside an organization like Microsoft is not as hard as people think it is. It's really just about having a leadership group inside Microsoft that understands the value of creativity and creative games. We're spending a lot of time figuring out, do we think that we can raise the standards of quality of the games that we're building? Can we become a real first-party studio?
I think working with Gearbox prepared us to work with Microsoft in a lot of ways because we let them into our world and we learned to be very, you know, concise and precise with our feedback back and forth.
Learning how to give and receive feedback is a really big part of an organization like Microsoft. When you're an independent developer, you do whatever you want. Ultimately, you're saying, hey, I am my own sort of thing.
For the first time in a very long time in my career, to be able to create without this cloud of impending doom about financing or studio politics. Not having to, carry those sort of twin albatrosses around, I think, are extremely liberating.
Being independent is risky, it's scary, and it's one of the reasons why I have a ton of respect for every independent out there. When we were going through our We Happy Few's development, we had to seek funding every year and a half or so. And what that does is it creates strange incentives about how you develop, because you're always thinking, what happens if it dries up? Now, as part of Microsoft, we don't have to worry about that. We can now know that we are supported. We can start planning a game from the beginning right until the end.
And that's actually removed a lot of the focus from finding where we're going to find the next paycheck to actually concentrating on what is it that we need to make great games. I could be more forward-looking to what do we actually need in order to actually succeed. And that's a huge difference from having a big backer like Microsoft that's allowing us our creative space and our creative freedom, from being an independent developer that's starving all the time and looking for money. Build the team not just for the next game, but for the next series of games.
If everyone else is anything like me, I think they are preparing to do the best work of their careers.
What a wonderful story. I hope you enjoyed hearing it as much as I enjoyed telling it. And remember, stay at home at night or terrible things may happen in the dark. I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time. Good night, all.
You feel like it's made you a better studio?
Well, I guess we'll know whether we're a better studio once we get out the next game, and people will tell us whether we're better or not.